Dr. Efem will be. Let's appreciate him as he comes forward. Let's appreciate him. He is the Acting Director of Research and Studies at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Lagos, Nigeria. Let's appreciate him as he comes forward, please. Let's appreciate him. Let's appreciate him. No, you're not doing it well, though. We had energy at the first time. The energy must not drop. Energy. Even DJ caught the energy.
Professor Efem Ubi. Professor Ubi is a distinguished academic and a leading expert in public service and entrepreneurship. His vast knowledge and impactful work makes him an invaluable speaker at this prestigious event. Meet Professor Efem Ubi. Esteemed scholar, Professor Ubi has made tremendous contributions to academia, particularly in leadership and economic development, inspiring many students and professionals worldwide. As an innovative leader known for his strategic thinking, he has played a key role in developing sustainable growth strategies across various sectors. A dedicated mentor, his passion for mentoring young entrepreneurs and leaders has shaped many successful careers, nurturing the next generation of African leaders. Join us at the African Future Leadership Public Service and Entrepreneurship Awards 2024 to hear from Professor Ubi and other visionary leaders as we celebrate excellence and inspire future generations. Let's honor those shaping Africa's future. Don't miss this transformative event.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that I'm a very shy person. And when they were giving my profile, I'm a little bit, shy because I'm too small, actually, to get that kind of profile. I'm actually humbled and very privileged to be here. And let me thank the organizer, the convener, Ambassador Makidahi. And let me also thank all the distinguished speakers here, and as well as distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen who are here, you're all welcome. I want to specifically thank Dr. Lucy Newman. In fact, after Ambassador Mark, he spoke, and when you spoke, I decided within me that I shouldn't have come up here because you spoke everything in my mind. You've talked about everything, a whole lot. In fact, the two speakers, the opening remarks by Makidahi and by Dr. Lucy, actually covered a whole lot of the problems. I'm actually very emotional. When I was listening to them speak, I'm emotional because I'm a scholar. I'm emotional because I work with government. I'm emotional because I'm an African. I'm emotional because I'm in a world that is imbalanced, a world where there's no equity, a world where there's no justice. I've been on TVs, and I've always been on TVs. And sometimes when I'm being interviewed, because I work with the government, I'm a bit emotional, but because I can't say the things I have to say. But that is not to say that I'm not going to be objective in terms of my analysis. A lot of issues came up. If you listen to the opening remarks by Ambassador Mark, and you listen to Dr. Newman's lecture or presentation, the key issues that have come up is Africa for Africa. And there was a period in time in history that we talk about finding African solution to African problem. There's also the discourse, which I heard Dr. Maybe she's a professor because she gave a very big lecture, a very good lecture, presentation, where she talked about nations in Africa are a big problem. I have given an interview and a lecture where I talked about the future of Africa. It's an uncertain future, where there are a lot of optimism. But even in that optimism, the future is uncertain. And the future is uncertain because there's a constant in the international system, a constant in global system. And what is that constant? The constant is transformation. There's a global transformation as well as global power rivalry. But putting it differently, there's a superpower rivalry. And in that superpower rivalry or global power rivalry, it's only Africa and the developing world that are caught in that web. And that is why I must say categorically, we are where we are. Except, I'm not too good with churches, but by God's grace, we can move. And by God's grace, we can move if we have transformational leadership. If we have leadership that is people-oriented. We've called few African countries that have moved beyond the normal. But I will say, before I go into the lecture proper, that nations are not made. Nations grow. Nations are, they just grow from the scratch like seeds. But African nations were created. And that is where the problem is, and which is what Dr. Newman was talking about. And the future of Africa is what I call irredentism. Irredentism meaning that there's going to be a clash of ethnic groups. The clash of ethnic groups is not going to be in the states, not within the state, but by entities of the same ethnic group in another state. We saw what happened in Nigeria. When ECOWAS decided to intervene, the Hausas told them they are our brothers. If you declare a war on Nigeria, you have declared a war on the Hausa people. You saw what happened in Mali, the Tuaregs. The Tuaregs are a smaller ethnic group in Mali. They are asking for self-determination. The larger of the ethnic group is in Niger. And when the Malian government in 2011, 2012 attacked the Tuaregs, they were attacking the Tuaregs, the Nigerian government told them, don't kill our people. Now, a very specific example, which is worldwide known, is the Indian-Pakistan Kashmir. This Kashmir is an ethnic group. You see them in Pakistan, and you see them in India. But that is not what we should be worried about. But what we should be worried about is our leadership across Africa. In 2014, I wrote an article. The article was titled, "Is Democracy Failing in Africa, or Africa Failing Under Democracy?" I gave a lot of factors and a lot of indicators why democracy is failing in Africa and why Africa is failing under democracy. In the next few weeks, I'll be in South Africa, and they're asking me to talk about democracy and development. But in my head, I am actually demystifying the fact that democracy does not guarantee development. But development sustains democracy. So I'll be talking in the next 3 weeks in South Africa on that. But let's go to the presentation. You see, a lot has been said, so that's why I'm not looking at the slide, but I will use the slides if I can. Why are we so uncommitted? Leadership, foreign policy, and economic development. But my case study will be Nigeria. We are truly an uncommitted continent. Our leaders have never given us what we actually needed. And you know the problem is because we don't have people-oriented leadership. Another major problem is that we don't have leadership that is development-focused. You know, like I said, I'm a bit emotional. I'm sorry that maybe I'm like that, but you see, I remember growing up. A lot of you in this house, if you're a young generation, you never saw what I saw. I didn't pay any school fees in the university. The highest school fees I paid from when I was doing my bachelor's, from my first year to final year was 4,000 naira. You can't beat it, 4,000 naira. But I would say 4,500 naira. Yeah, because I had to pay at my final year 500 naira for accommodation. I saw Nigeria. I was delivering a lecture some few weeks ago too, and I told them, I'm one lucky generation. I saw 2 centuries. I was born in the 20th century. I find myself in the 21st century. And I saw development gradually that was taking place in Nigeria. I saw when they were wiring a lot of houses. And the first day, then it was NEPA. Once they switch off the light, everybody would jump, we're all happy, And I remember how we were catching termites with those lights, but that's a joke anyway. It was just the fun that we saw. Things were better. You don't lock your rooms, you don't lock your houses, people don't steal. If they steal, they just steal food to eat. That is the Nigerian we had. And I met, and things became this, and things got this worst over the years. Next slide, anyway. Well, I just wanted to prep your mind for the lecture. When we talk about foreign policy, we often concentrate on political and diplomatic relations with other states in the international system. We give less attention to foreign policy as an instrument of a country's economic growth. In fact, I want to let you know today that nations are market. Just picture it like that. Nations are market. You sell what you have. You buy what you don't have. Or you buy what you don't have enough. Now, nations decide to sell who they want to sell to. It is left for you to play your game well. And that's why people like Hans Morgenthau wrote Politics Amongst Nations. And there's another scholar who talks about games nation play. This we must understand. Our leaders have to understand. But unfortunately, we've not said good things about our leaders. I'm not talking about Nigeria, I'm talking about Africa in general. Because we had leaders who are sit tight. They want to remain as president forever. We have leaders who are permanent president. Someone will be in power for over 30 years. And they don't want to relinquish power. In fact, even if they are sick and they are vegetable, those around them run the office and pretend that it's the president that is running the office. That is why Africa is this way. Now, have you ever wondered, as a young generation, we all seated here, have you ever wondered why, after 60 years, no country in Africa is industrialized? I wrote another paper which I argued, or the title of that paper was Boom in Gloom. Boom in Gloom. The myth of Africa's economic development or growth. I'm a radical scholar. Or anyway, maybe I'm not radical, I'm a pluriverse scholar, because I'm beginning to question the existing thoughts. Why is it that you use statistics to depict Africa's growth and development? Now, when you look at these statistics, you come to the ground, it doesn't measure up with HDI. That is where the problem is. If the growth statistically is going up, it should precipitate on the human development. So for the IMF and the World Bank, they look at quantitative growth as against qualitative growth. And in the last 2 decades, at the turn of the millennium, prior to that time, Times Magazine wrote, Africa is a dark continent. They wrote a whole lot of not good about Africa. Eventually, by 2012, they now wrote African Rising. And how was Africa rising? Statistically. By 2014, 2015, the whole economy across Africa had collapsed. There was recession. Since then, there had been recession 2, 3, 4 times in some countries. Why was it so? Just because we are a commodity market, and aside that, we are embedded within what is called the commodity trap. And what happens is that, you see, anytime there's a shock in the international market, everything collapses. Oil will drop to $30 from the prospects, the procrastination that was, during budget making, say $60, it will drop to 30, to 20, to 15, and all that will destroy the economy. But I think we'll move further. But it seems this is too much of an academic analysis, but then I gave some definition of foreign policy. Is the goals that the state officials seek to attain abroad, the values that give rise to those objectives, and the means or instruments used to pursue them. But I'll go to the next, go to the next slide. I'll go to the next. Yeah, go to the next one. Now, I will use, this is my basic definition that will drive this presentation. Foreign policy is seen here as the action and inaction of a nation towards another or non-state actors within the international system with the objective of safeguarding national interests of the state. Now, the question is, what is the national interest of the state? Next slide. We'll come to what the national interest is. Economic development clarified here. Globally, when we talk about economic development, we use such indicators as industrialization, investment, equality, high per capita income, social services, employment, to categorize that. But economic growth is defined as the increase of goods and services that improves human lives and promote happiness over a period of time. It is sweet, but then you cannot separate these two. They are like Siamese twins. They cannot separate them. You cannot disconnect them. Foreign policy has a great impact on nations' economic development, just the same way economic development affects state power and foreign policy in international relations. One is used to hearing that a country's foreign policy aims to promote its development, but rarely does one hear about the mechanism through which foreign policy can actually pursue that goal. I studied in Asia, and I went there in 2008 when even China had not gotten to this point. The beauty about that time I went is the fact that when you go to Walmart to get a product, they are not written in English, they are written in Chinese. And we, the foreigners, will say, why is it that everything is written in Chinese, or we call it Hangzi? The character is called Hangzi. Why is it written? You put English. 1 year after, everybody started doing that because we were the few. There were older ones who went there in the 90s, but we were the few who went there in the, around 2000 and early 2000, 2008, between the first decade of the millennium. And little wonder is we saw development from the scratch. You can come to an area, within 1 month, that area has totally changed. Now, what we saw that trips us, our imagination, was the fact that China builds new city every 10 years. Their system is actually different. But what we have argued over years, there are lessons we can emulate from such a country. It's a communist country. We're not saying that we should become communist. But we should emulate what is called modernization process, or let's use, that is the Chinese language I'm using, phrases. What we call development process. Build new cities. Decongest existing and older cities. Create jobs. Now, what is foreign policy all about? It's not about selling your products, selling oil, selling crude oil. It's about also learning from those countries and implementing. But you don't have to implement hook, line, and sinker, and which is also what I talked about democracy. Democracy is not a one-size-fits-all. Every society will have to adopt democracy, but applied it within the socio-structural dynamics of that society. And that is how growth is obtained. That's how economic growth and development is. You get economic growth and development. But when you adopt and you adapt hook, line, and sinker, there's going to be a problem. And so, it is difficult to divorce economics from politics. In the same vein, it is somewhat difficult to disassociate foreign policy from economic development. The whole idea of foreign policy is to attract foreign investment, to attract economic development. You see, like I said, nations are like market. You cannot get money if you don't sell. You must sell. But in doing that, you also can attract money by keeping the home front well. And this is what we are all talking about. How do we keep the home front well? We'll get to that point. So the next point, right? The next slide. Attainment of economic growth and development is now part of the explicit objective that a state must strive to achieve as it relates with the international community. What is the nexus? The next slide, please. What is the nexus? The next slide. Next slide. Leadership is key in any country's development and posture internationally. Political leadership and personalities of the leaders are some of the several factors influencing policy. When I'm asked to do a discussion on nation building and growth and development, I think the major focus is on leadership. And we all sitting down here, we are all leaders in the future. Most of you become politicians. I am not going to be a politician because I don't know how to manage politicians or politics too, play politics, because I'm too straightforward. I'll say it the way it is. I don't know how to play games, no. But political leadership and personalities of the leaders are some of the several factors influencing policy. In fact, the quality of leadership is a key factor in any country's economic growth and decision. So this affects both short-term and structural policies of the country, which in turn have an important influence on the level of economic growth and development. But from the above, whether it is in terms of policies, economics, growth, economic development, leadership is everything. I'm telling you, leadership is everything. If you don't have good leaders, you won't have a good country. There's nothing you can talk, except there's an alternate thought to that. But leadership remains number one. The nature of leadership determines the nature of the country. The country you get depends on the leadership, and the leadership you get also creates the country you get. This is something like Dr. Newman was saying. We all have to come together, work together in concerted effort to determine our future in Africa. She said Africa is a continent of youth. That's how it is described in the literature. Africa is a continent of youth, the youngest continent. Too many youth. Next slide, some of the root cause of the problem of African foreign policies. A major part of the problem of many African foreign policy is deeply rooted in the fabric of their history, as well as in the convoluted and not so coordinated manner in which it is made. I'll say, one of my latest articles came out this year, and I talked about the problem of our country, foreign policy. And that is the problem of the generality of Africa's policy, foreign policy. And what is that problem? Is that, and I state it categorically everywhere, we don't have a foreign policy. I will prove this now. 1961, when Nigeria became a republic, up to 1979, go and read the constitution. There's nothing like foreign policy in any of those constitutions. None. So where do we derive our foreign policy from? 79, 99. 99 is a borrowed, the foreign policy, objectives and directive principles in that 99 constitution is that of the 1979, which is there. And it is titled objective. That means it's an objective you want to meet. But what is the action or inaction that you're supposed to use to meet that objective? Is what foreign policy is. Like I defined it, action and inaction. So that is where we stand. Now, one of the major problems why African countries, many African countries, including us, don't have a foreign policy is national identity. What is the Nigerianness in you and me? You see, the only time you talk about Nigeria is when you are abroad. I lived there for years. So when we are all together, we don't talk about Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, Calabar. No, Nigerian. It is only when you come back here, you say, you meet someone, how are you, where are you from? You're asking somebody in Nigeria, where are you from? He will tell you, say, I'm Igbo, or I'm from Imo State. There's no national identity. A national identity is based on culture, history, language, religion. Have you ever wondered why European states have a population, a country in Europe has a population of 200, 300, 400 people? You know why? Because each group decides to be alone. I am not saying this because I'm asking for secession. We are not going to do that. But we can create a national identity. Our foreign policy, the whole of Africa's foreign policy is like you're coming to warn me. I hope not. The whole of Africa's policy, I know, don't worry, I'm finished. The whole of Africa's foreign policy, many of them are circumstantial. It is just the exigency of the time. There are a lot of arguments to that. No national identity. Please go back. The next, go back to historical circumstantial. Historically circumstantial foreign policy. All of us. There are examples. All of you say Nigeria's foreign policy is tilting towards Islam, is tilting towards Israel, Christians, depends on who is the president. Nigeria's foreign policy does not tilt towards religion. It does not tilt towards ethnicity. It's circumstantial. I'll give you one example. Everybody shouts, Nigeria is a member of the OIC. Who took Nigeria to OIC? It was General Yakubu Gowon, who was the head of state. And he's a Christian. And it was circumstantial because he needed weapons to wage the Biafra war. And now went to Nasser in Egypt to ask for aid. NASA asked him to go there. That was how NASA asked him to go to that new organization that was formed. Nigeria became got the observer status. So it is circumstantial. Everything we have today. The next point, lack of codification, lack of seriousness in Africa. Our foreign policies are not codified. They are also very unserious. Now, let me look at, yes. You see, the Afrocentric foreign policy we talk about all the time was just a speech that was made at the United Nations. Now, the non-alignment foreign policy we talk about, it was also part of that speech. This is how our foreign policy came. We are African-centered. We are non-aligned. Now, every administration comes with different foreign policy. For instance, economic diplomacy, next slide. Economic diplomacy, diplomacy of consequence, citizens diplomacy of Yaradua, fighting security, corruption, and consolidation of democracy under President Muhammadu Buhari, former president. All these are deciphered from speeches not found in the constitutions and nor are they codified. I'm just using Nigeria as a case study. All this new trust boils down to we will, I will, but the how it will be undertaken at every instant is not brought to the fore. This is coming to the heels of the fact that foreign policy objectives have not been clearly separated from foreign policy actions or inactions. Now, take for instance the United Nations foreign policy. It is documented. United Nations will tell you, the United States will tell you, if you do this, we will do that. But no African government will tell you, if you do this, we'll do that. That is the action. That is the foreign policy. That is the inaction. So we need to codify our foreign policy. The above epistemic and endemic problem shows lack of nationalism, patriotism, and commitment to nation building. That is totality of Africa. There's also the problems of semantic, conceptualization, and operationalization. We have not been able to conceptualize our foreign policy or operationalize it across Africa. And that is why they will tell us what to do at every particular time. In fact, you are the receiving end. The outcome, for instance, we never benefited from our foreign policy actions over the years. It has not given us an economic well-being. We have not benefited in economic terms and any other way. We went to Liberia, we fought and gave peace to Liberia. What did we gain? The Americans went to Iraq. They destroyed Iraq, but they built Iraq. They gave it to their contractors. We need to sit up. Africa needs to sit up. Our foreign policy over the years, especially Nigeria, has been very altruistic. Let's go to the next slide. The output. I said, the question of weight and the utility of Nigeria's foreign policy in the 21st century, but also the question of if we truly have an astute foreign policy. And that's why I'm saying the objectives enshrined in the constitutions are just objective goals to meet, but what is the foreign policy to meet those goals? This is what African leaders need to set out. Is Nigeria's foreign policy corrected in this Fourth Republic? I will just leave that to you. But what I will conclude here is that foreign policy should reflect the domestic need of the people, despite international pressure to the contrary, and must work towards the attainment of socio-economic and welfare and national development in all aspects, as categorically stated in the 1999 Constitution. Is it the case in the Fourth Republic? From 1999 to date, various administrations have come up with different foreign policy to achieve economic growth and development. We have the Obasanjo's foreign policy of reconstruction and image building. We have the Yaradua's diplomacy of consequence and or citizens diplomacy. Next slide, just go on. We have Jonathan's foreign policy of attraction of foreign investment or attracting foreign investment. Then we have Buhari's foreign policy, which I have always seen as a tripartite foreign policy, which is fight against corruption, fight against insecurity, economic growth and development. But was it any achievement? I'll leave that to you. Now look at the other slide, please. We are still processing the last one. In conclusion, I would say the success of any administration's foreign policy measure in economic terms is dependent on the leadership at any particular time. I will conclude by stating that power as a whole encompasses the military and technological capabilities of state. But that does not say you should neglect that. It consists of capabilities, some of which are economic in nature, such as levels of industrialization and productivity, gross national product, national income, and income on per capita basis. For this reason, government should continually be concerned about the kind of economic impact their foreign policy decisions will have domestically. Any government that fails to manage their domestic economy essentially gives room for volatile issues such as unemployment and inflation to inflict pressure on the state, which can either weaken the state and make it vulnerable and unsustainable, or in some countries may even result in the removal of leaders from office. Now, before I say bye-bye, I had an interview last year on the incessant military purchase in Africa, and they asked me, and I told them the reason why. The major reason, apart from other reasons, is insecurity. If you go back to 1960s, up to the 90s, where coups were taking place in Africa, one of the major issues they raised in those, issues that were raised in those discourses were maladministration, misappropriation of funds, corruption, and all that. But in this millennium, all the coups that have taken place have raised one issue: insecurity. One of the issues they have raised is insecurity. Mali, the military took over because of the insecurity. The same thing in Burkina Faso, the same thing in Niger. And so, what will be the position of our countries? What should we do? Where do we go from here? I think we need leaders, like I said at the initial stage, that are people-oriented, leaders that are development-focused, and we should learn lessons from the emerging economies and emerging powers. I thank you all for your attention. Share, merci, and grazie.